present Céline is to present the man who performed an autopsy on the 20th century while he was still alive. He was widely considered as one of the most influential writers after Proust and many others in the French society, but also in the international society. Proust, for example, used a magnifying glass to look at high society. Céline used a scalpel to look at the gutter. He was one of the purest and one of the most cynical writer. Céline, born Louis-Ferdinand Céline, was not a professional man of letters. He was a physician who spent his whole life treating the destitutes in the suburbs of Paris. He had a clinical eye. That's why he makes sense. He was a doctor who didn't look at the patient. He didn't see a soul or a hero. He saw a heart rate, an infection, a decaying body. Céline applied this medical coldness to whole of humanity, and probably it's going to sound terrible, but hear me out. He was severely wounded after World War One, and this shatters his faith in a noble cause. For Céline, history was just a series of meat grinders, aka the wars, where the poor are processed for the benefit of the rich, and where you don't die for a country, an ideal, or for a philosophy, but you die for, as Anatole France would say, you die for the industrials, you die for not the people you think you fight back home, which are your family, your ideals, your philosophies, your mind, your freedom, but really you die for nothing. And that's one of the things that Céline feared. French literature at the time used to be polite. It used to be perfect, cold, academic, and Céline felt that this was all a lie. He argued that the truth of a human is found in the nervous system, not in their logic. So he used quite a metaphorical approach by the metro. He said that if you want to move people, you have to bend the language, and he compared his actual writing as the metro, as the subway. You don't see the tracks, you just feel the vibration in the speed. He broke the pack of the French sentence, and that's one of the thing he said, and used the most, actually, the three dots and the, I think it's called ellipsis, and he created a rhythm, a certain rhythm that people didn't have before. He said, I walked down the street and felt a sense of dread because the war was coming. That's how he reformulated the street, point, 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 the shadows, point, point, point. You get the idea. The big disaster coming for us all. You could smell it in the soup. It's over. See? It's always been over. It feels like a man is grabbing you by the collar at 3 a.m. in a bar and telling you the terrifying truth. It's poetic because it has the rhythm of a heartbeat, and it has the pureness of the soul and of the of human feelings that are not often very beautiful. And in one of his books, The Journey to the End of the Night, he followed one of the characters, Bardamu, who is basically a coward, a wanderer, and a cynic. And Céline makes sense because he admits that we all feel that we don't want to die for a flag, and a lot of people feel that, but they don't want to admit it. And he views patriotism as a trick played by the big shots to get the small shots. Us, the poor people, the proper people who suffer from power, not necessarily rich or poor, but the people who are able to lose everything in a war. And we're standing in front of the cannons, we're standing in front of the missiles, and that's what he says. And the end of the night, for him, the night is the ultimate truth of death and nothingness. For Céline, life means realizing that we're all in a journey towards the end of it, the end of the night. And the only thing that makes it bearable is a dark, hysterical laughter and the occasional brief flash of human pity. It's very sad, I know. But he viewed humans as machines driven by fear and anger, and that we are, how do I say that? That we're just landlords of our flesh. We're leasing our bodies until death collects the debt, basically. And he lived in a dark time. He lived in the 1930s, But his misanthropy, which is the hatred of everyone, narrowed into some kind of paranoia. And he wrote a lot of pamphlets that are extreme, and even the certain extreme political figures at the time found delirious. He actually was outcasted. He was an outcast after Second World War, and his influence later died. Um, However, a lot of authors continued this raw style, and he was not just a genius because of his style, but also because he was very cruel in his approach to the world and to humanity. He captured the scream of the modern world. Imagine he lived in a time where, between two world wars, and where, well, hope was very hard to find. And he showed that you can find a strange, shimmering beauty in the most disgusting places, provided that you have the tools to describe it. The greatest defeat in anything is to forget, and especially the thing that has defeated you, and to let yourself be slaughtered without ever realizing how far gone you are. In that quote that Céline actually used, he's um, he's saying that we're already defeated by death and by society, but by writing about that defeat in such a poetic way, and with energy, with emotion, and with charisma, so to speak, he achieved a kind of victory because he turned even the most disgusting pieces of society into a song. Probably wonder, why is it that I'm talking about a man who seems so cruel in the way he describes the world, and probably someone cynical who doesn't show a lot of beauty or positivism? Well, Céline was considered a genius because he was the first writer to find a literary language that matched the scale horror of the 20th century. He was the first author who was able to describe it in such a way that people who used the elegant, balanced words to describe the world, well, this is where Céline intervened, and he realized that in the trenches of the First World War, elegant prose was a lie, and that he felt like if he was writing without putting his feelings into it and putting his music, as I like to call it, he would be lying to us. He just didn't describe the the world in his own views, but he wrote about a world that was completely shattered between wars, between horrors and traumas. And the century before him, literature was about the soul, the character, and Céline replaced the soul with the body. He realized that the 20th century was the era of the meat grinder, of the bad people in um in an era where we used to glorify, and we still do, the one mind solution, for example, Napoleon and other very famous characters. And he found that soldiers are not heroes, but they're packages of meat, as he said, waiting to be processed. He was the first to admit that we are 90% fear and 10% hunger. It stripped away from the romantic lies that led millions of young people to die in 1914 and 1939. He showed the world as the medical condition that it is. It's infected and it's a dying organism. It's basically one of the emotive style was one of his biggest genius, because he argued that the classical literature was like a dead language used to describe a living nightmare. And he brought the slang to the gutter, as they called it in French, l'argot, into high literature. And he didn't just record it, he didn't just wrote it, he still stylized it. He used breaking sentence with ellipses to force the reader to breathe at the same pace as the panic, exhausted person. It created a music like a jazz like rhythm. And reading Silic was just like being inside a person's head during a riot. It was breathless. It was hallucinating. It was raw. He captured the acceleration of the 20th century, the noise of the cities, the speed, the machine, the war, and the fragmentation of the modern mind. He redefined the travel novel. Travel novel was often seen as progress and adventure, and for him, It was a descent. He portrayed the world as a place where there is nowhere to hide, whether his protagonist is in the army, the jungles of Africa, or the Ford factories in Detroit. He finds the same thing: the exploitation of the small man by the big system. He was a genius for saying that the night, the lack of meaning, and the cruelty of power was the same everywhere. Detroit's assembly lines were just the trenches without the bullet. He predicted the globalized misery that would define the rest of the century and our century so far. He was a genius because he refused to provide a moral. Most of the 20th century, like Sartre, Camus, Orwell, they tried to find a political or philosophical answer. For example, one of the most famous argument of Camus is that the world is not meaningless, but that you have to find meaning because it's absurd. And he basically thought that no, there is no answer. There is only the rhythm of the screen. There is only the reality, the pureness of the reality. He captured it as an hallucination of logic, as a lack of logic. We're a species that uses the most advanced science to perform the most insane act of cruelty. He showed that civilization is just a thin layer of paint over a volcano. And he documented the cracks of the paint with a musicality that makes you want to keep reading, even with the subject matter that makes you want to look away. He was the pagan prophet of the 20th century. He didn't look at a world through the eyes of a politician. He looked at it through the eyes of a doctor. He saw a wounded animal, and instead of trying to save it, he decided to write down the exact sound of its moaning. And, well, to be fair, it's not like he could have saved anyone or anything. If you look at Orwell, even one of the most influential writer ever, and actually at least of his century, what did 1984 change? What did the Animals Farm change? Well, the truth is probably nothing, right? It's the truth is that the criticism of a system doesn't make it more bearable. It doesn't make it less evil. It doesn't make it less true. If we look at the atrocities that we have committed in the war or that we have suffered in the war, what is to say that because some writers or some politicians try to fight it, that we are free from it? If we look at current North Korea, China, Iran, and a lot of countries inside the world where you have wars, we have tyranny, what do those writers change? And the cycles continue. You know, those atrocities, they keep coming, the wars, they keep happening. And perhaps as I'm writing now, there's another war being started in Africa, in South America, in Europe, in elsewhere. And it's something that is very traumatizing and to understand. And I think this is purely what Céline was understanding, is that now we have a world that is not like the beauty that we want to describe it, but with the drama that is precisely the world, which is that the world is a fallacy. The world is very harsh. The world wants to beat you down. And the best thing that you can do is take it and describe it. And describe it because there is beauty in that absurdity. And his thoughts were that his dark genius was that he turned this nihilism into a symphony, and that you are alone. The people in charge are idiots and that you're going to die, which is very hard to understand and very hard to read. I mean, very simple to understand, but very hard to read and to comprehend. But if you're looking for positivism in the sense that everything will be okay, I don't think you will find it with Céline. But if you're looking for vitalism, the burst of energy of staying alive despite the horror, Céline is full of it. He says that we are moving into the dark, but look how beautiful the bubbles rise when we scream, which is very, of course, very raw and very tough. But he contradicted the optimism of the early 20th century with the huge machine, the bright lights, the promises of peace. And he described this negativism It's actually a form of integrity. He refused to be positive because he knew that by being positive, it's a sort of mental illness. It's a sort of fallacy that allows us to ignore the suffering of others. And to him, the only good person is the one who admits that everything is terrible, but still offers you a piece of bread. Céline is not a hater. He's an exhausted witness.